This is a recording for the Maritime Archaeology Trust for Fathoming the Future project, made possible thanks to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. In this blog, we will be describing some of the heroic stories of nurses on ships during the First World War, examining their acts of bravery and compassion. During the First World War, the need for hospital ships increased greatly to deal with the large number of casualties. The Royal Navy operated 77 vessels during the war and transported 2,655,000 British and Commonwealth sick and wounded personnel into British ports. In 1907, the Hague Convention laid down protocols to protect hospital ships. The convention required the ships not to be used for any military purposes or interfere with combat, be clearly marked with green stripes, red crosses, white hulls, and carry appropriate identification lights at night, and to help any sick and injured people regardless of nationality. In return, if they followed the rules, under no circumstances could a hospital ship be attacked or sunk. However, in 1917, the High Commander of Imperial Germany alleged that Allied hospital ships breached the Hague Convention by transporting able-bodied men alongside the injured and were carrying arms, so must therefore be attacked. As a result of this, it changed the way hospital ships operated, and so their traditional markings were replaced by dazzle camouflage, and some were equipped with jet guns. This was the arrangement for the remainder of the war, and hospital ships sailed at night, unlit and with naval escort. Her Majesty's Hospital Ship, Anglia. This ship was sailing from Boulogne, a mile from Folkestone Gate, loaded with wounded personnel from the Battle of Loo. On the 17th of November 1915, at around 12:30 p.m, it struck a mine which had been laid by the German U-boat UC-5, and the explosion occurred well into the starboard side vessel, which gave no one in that area a chance of escape. However, through the organised and quick thinking of the nurses and crew, some survivors were able to get away in a life craft. On the day it sank, the hospital ship Anglia was carrying almost 200 cot cases. These were servicemen who had lost limbs, plus 200 walking wounded. There was also a crew of 56 and a complement of doctors and nurses. Survivors' stories of nurses' heroism. These are stories told by wounded men who were on board the Anglia, and mention 4 nurses who demonstrated selfless humanity in the face of death. As mentioned, the ship Anglia entered the water at an angle which suggested instant death, and the staff were faced with the problem of getting 200 cot cases up from the wards in almost impossible situation. Mary Rodwell was in charge of the cot cases, which, as already explained, these were servicemen who had lost limbs, so were unable to walk to safety. The water rushed into the lowest wards with water over their heads. Men in other wards who were able to do so scrabbled to the top deck, and with other wounded men attempted to save others by hunting for lifebelts. In all this commotion, the nurses were working steadily, concerned with lifebelts and bringing up all the wounded who could be moved along the slanting corridor. These were the matron, Mrs. Mitchell, Nurse Walton, Nurse Meldrum and Nurse Rodwell. Some of the comments reported by the survivors on the ship stated, "The nurses worked magnificently, but you have no idea of the difficulty of their task." The nurses and matron on board would not use the lifebelts themselves, but insisted on giving them to the men, and when the destroyers came from Dover to take the wounded to safety, the nurses refused to leave the ship. They said they would stay with their men. So what do we know about these nurses? Nurse Mary Rodwell was born on the 29th of February 1880, and she trained at Hendon Infirmary in London and had a varied nursing career at the Samaritan Free Hospital in Marylebone and later in private nursing homes. When war broke out, Mary volunteered for foreign service, and in 1915 she joined the ship Anglia. She was the only nurse to go down with the ship, refusing to leave the helpless men, choosing instead to comfort them in their final moments. The last time she was seen on deck by the matron, shortly before the explosion, she was fetching warm woolies for the casualties below. A selfless and futile gesture that she must have known would lead to her death. There was no way off the boat for her patients, and she was unwilling to let them die alone. She was also a woman who was fighting for the right to vote, and as a suffragette, this is really quite astonishing. Sadly, Mary Rodwell's body was never recovered. Alice Meldrum. Alice was a member of the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service Reserve, and she was 25 years old at the time of the sinking on the Anglia. She wrote an account of the situation, and here is a short excerpt. "There was no panic whatsoever, and when one realizes that the majority of cases they were suffering from fractured limbs, severe wounds, and amputation, it speaks volumes for their spirit, their grit, and real bravery, for they must have suffered agonies of pain." The HM hospital ship Glenart Castle. This ship was originally named the Galathean, and in 1914 was requisitioned for war service as a hospital ship and given the new name Glenart Castle. On the night of the 26th of February 1918, the ship left Newport, South Wales, sailing for Brest in France to collect the wounded. On board were a crew of 122 and 64 Royal Army Medical Corps nurses and chaplains. Fishermen in the Bristol Channel reported seeing the ship clearly lit up with green hospital lights and red markings. But despite this, the commander of the German U-boat UC-56 ordered the attack. The ship sank in 8 minutes with the loss of 162 lives. 57 are commemorated at the Hollybrook Memorial in Southampton. Only 32 people survived. Here are the stories of those nurses on board the Glenart Castle. Matron K. Beaufort. She was born on the 20th of December 1868 at Birmingham. She had a varied nursing career before joining the Queen Alexandra Imperial Military Nursing Service. In 1914, she served on the hospital ship Dover Castle. Then she joined as matron on the hospital ship Glenart Castle in November 1917. Staff nurse Rebecca Rose Beresford. Rebecca was born on the 18th of June 1878 in Sydenham, London. She also had a varied career, including joining the staff of the War Hospital for Prisoners in Belmont, Surrey, in May 1917, on the same day as staff nurse Edith Blake, and they became good friends. When Edith moved to work on the Glenart Castle, Rebecca requested a transfer to the same ship. Staff nurse Edith Blake. Edith was born in Sydney, and prior to the First World War, she had worked at a coastal hospital in Sydney. Later, she worked in general hospitals in Egypt, including the War Hospital for Prisoners in Belmont. Edith joined Her Majesty's Hospital ship Glenart Castle on the 17th of November 1917. Staff nurse Elizabeth Algar. Elizabeth was born in Glasgow in 1880, but spent her childhood in Durban, South Africa. She undertook her basic nursing training in Natal, working in South Africa and then in Clydebank, Scotland. She enrolled with the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service in 1916 and joined the Glenart Castle a short while afterwards. Staff nurse Charlotte Edith Henry. Charlotte was born in Essex in 1877. She trained in Plymouth from 1897 and held various nursing posts in the Midlands and Serbia at a typhus hospital, and enrolled with the Queen Alexandra Imperial Nursing Service in 1916. In 1917, Charlotte, alongside her four sisters, changed their names by deed poll from Henrich to Henry. Charlotte's sister Gertrude, also a nurse, had been subject to a lot of anti-German sentiment during her nursing career, which prompted them to all change their name, as none of them were married. Staff nurse Mary McKinnon. Mary was born in Inverness-shire and was called up for duty at the 2nd Southern General Hospital in Bristol in October 1916. On renewing her contract, she was then transferred to the Glenart Castle on the 15th of February 1918. Sister Jane Evans. Jane was born in Brighton in 1881 and worked at a hospital in Bethnal Green, having trained at Leicester Royal Infirmary. She later became a staff nurse and was working as a private nurse at the Brighton Isolation Hospital. She joined the Imperial Nursing Service in March 1915 and eventually worked on the Glenart Castle. Sister Rose Elizabeth Kendall. Rose was born in Birmingham in 1887. She completed her probationary period at the infirmary in Edgerton in 1908 and was promoted to staff nurse, then ward sister, by 1912. She joined the Glenart Castle in November 1917. These stories represent a small snapshot of these women's lives who were cut short, and it also demonstrates the range of skills, talent and experience that they brought from across the world to nursing sick and wounded men during the First World War. With the passing of time, our links to the past will inevitably disappear, as there are no longer any soldiers or nurses alive who served in the First World War. This is why memorials are so important as part of our link to the past, and to recognise the service that these personnel served. 7 British and 1 Australian hospital ships are commemorated at the Hollybrook Memorial in Southampton, including 13 women of the nursing services. Thank you for listening. This has been made possible by the Maritime Archaeological Trust for Fathoming the Future project, research by Shirley Wilson, with written resources provided, Anglia and Asturias hospital ship for the First World War, the Hollybrook Memorial, No Grave But the Sea, both booklets part of the Forgotten Wrecks of the First World War. Also extra information taken from additional sources, news from Crystal Palace, Mary Rodwell, the heroine who time forgot, and the National Archives blogs 100 years since the sinking of Her Majesty's Hospital ship, Glenard Castle. Thank you very much.